The alarms on Earth's Central Command blared across every continent, interrupting broadcasts, forcing global networks into emergency mode. Red alerts stretched across the system, but nothing could prepare humanity for what came next. On Colony Nova 6, located on the farthest edge of Earth's expanding reach into space, devastation struck faster than anyone could comprehend. Reports flooded in. Schools, daycare centers, pediatric hospitals and playgrounds had been wiped out in one coordinated attack. It wasn't just destruction, it was surgical, methodical, and unspeakably cruel. When the tally came in, the numbers hit like a gut punch. 800,000 children gone, not killed, taken. Commander Ethan Vale stood still as the announcement spread across every channel on Earth, every corner of human space. Families were collapsing in the streets, mothers clutched holograms of their children, fathers screamed at the sky, helpless. Ethan's own sister, Delilah, had lived on Nova 6 with her 6-year-old daughter, Ivy. He hadn't heard from her since the attack. The news anchor's voice was flat as they confirmed that the colony's communication lines were down. No survivors reported. Ivy's smiling face haunted Ethan's mind, the last image he had of her waving goodbye before they'd left for the colony. Inside Earth's war room, chaos unfolded as generals and politicians tried to make sense of the abduction. The Kravik, an alien race previously known only through intercepted signals and rumors, had made their intentions brutally clear with this act. For the first time, they had shown themselves, not as diplomats or explorers, but as predators. And they hadn't just attacked, they had come for what mattered most. Ethan could barely breathe as the images of destroyed schools and empty homes flickered across the large holographic screen in front of him. His fists clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles turned white. The Kravik's ships had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only grief and rage. They hadn't asked for ransom, no demands, no warnings. They simply took the children and disappeared into the void. Admiral Kane paced in front of the gathered leaders in the war room, his face grim, his voice low and filled with restrained fury. This wasn't just an attack, it's an act of genocide. They didn't target military bases or infrastructure. They came for the most vulnerable among us. They took our future. Ethan's chest burned with helpless rage. He wasn't supposed to be here. After 15 years of service as a tactical officer, he'd retired. He'd thought he was done with war, with missions that left him emotionally scarred and sleepless. But now, with his niece among the stolen, he knew he had no choice but to return. Every instinct screamed that he couldn't sit on the sidelines for this. He had to be part of whatever was coming. President Connolly, a severe woman with silver-streaked hair, addressed the room, her tone trying to steady the broken pieces of the gathered leaders. We need answers. Now, why target children? What do the Kravik gain from this? An intelligence officer stepped forward, his tablet trembling slightly in his hand. Madam President, we intercepted fragmented Kravik communications. The language is difficult to decipher, but from what we gathered, they see humanity as a contaminant, a species that spreads unpredictably. They've called us a plague. The word echoed like a curse through the room. A plague. That was how the Kravik saw them. Not as equals, not as beings to negotiate with, but as something to be eradicated. And by taking their children, the Kravik were sending a message. They would not let humanity grow. They would not allow them to spread. The weight of it settled on Ethan like a crushing force. He glanced down at a photo of Ivy he always carried, taped to the inside of his old military identification tag. The idea of her, his innocent, sweet niece, being seen as a threat, being taken by creatures who saw her as nothing more than biological material to be controlled or destroyed, was too much. He had spent his entire career in the military, learning how to keep his emotions in check. But now, every fiber of his being screamed for action. for vengeance. Admiral Kane leaned heavily on the strategy table, the holographic display reflecting off his weathered face. "We're out of time. We can't sit here wringing our hands. The Kravik have declared war without saying a word. Now it's up to us to respond." Some of the leaders looked nervous. "We're not ready," one of the council members whispered, his voice barely audible. "We've only just begun to explore interstellar space. We don't have the fleet size or firepower to launch a campaign against an alien empire we barely understand." Admiral Kane shot him a sharp look. "Do you think the Kravik care whether we're ready? They have our children." He turned toward Ethan. "Commander Vale, I know you weren't expecting this. I know you plan to stay out of military affairs after your retirement. But we need people like you, now more than ever." Ethan's jaw tightened, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. He knew what Kane was asking. This wouldn't be just another mission. This would be personal, brutal, and unforgiving. And there was no guarantee of success. But what choice did he have? He took a step forward, every movement deliberate, as if to solidify his resolve. "I'll lead the first strike," Ethan said, his voice low but unwavering. "We hit them hard, and we get our children back." The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. President Connolly gave a solemn nod. "You understand what this means, Commander Vale. Once we engage, there's no going back. The Kravik won't negotiate. They've drawn their line in the sand. This will be a war of annihilation." Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "They've already declared that war. We're just answering." As the room erupted into preparations, military planners calling for troop deployments, engineers rushing to prepare the fleet, Ethan remained still for a moment, letting the enormity of his decisions sink in. This wasn't just about the children anymore. It was about sending a message to the Kravik and to any other alien race that dared to think humanity was weak. With a final glance at Ivy's photo, Ethan whispered to himself, "I'm coming for you, I promise." And just like that, the die was cast. Humanity's war for survival had begun, and Ethan Vale would make sure the Kravik paid in blood. The news of the abduction spread like wildfire, igniting fear and anger across every nation on Earth and its colonies. Protests erupted in the streets, demanding immediate action. Parents clutched at photographs, sobbing as the reality set in that their children were no longer on this planet. Military enlistments skyrocketed overnight, with thousands of civilians offering to take up arms. But the harsh truth loomed. Humanity wasn't ready for war, especially not against an unknown force as advanced as the Kravik. In the war room, President Connolly sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of exhaustion. Around her, Earth's top military minds and government officials argued bitterly about the best course of action. Some advocated for immediate retaliation, full-force attacks on Kravik-controlled space. Others warned that doing so would only provoke a massacre, putting the children in greater danger. "We can't afford to hesitate," Admiral Kane growled, slamming his fist on the table. "Every second we waste, those children are slipping further out of reach. If we wait, we lose them." A general from the European fleet shook his head. "And what exactly are we attacking? We don't know where they've taken them. We don't know the layout of their space or even how advanced their technology is. Charging in blind will only get more people killed." The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone knew the stakes. The Kravik had not made demands, had not opened negotiations. Their silence was louder than any declaration of war. They didn't see humanity as something worth negotiating with. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. It was something far worse. Commander Ethan Vale sat at the edge of the room, arms crossed, silently absorbing every word. He'd been called back into service just days ago, and already he felt the weight of the mission crushing him. His mind raced through possible scenarios, each one darker than the last. What did the Kravik want with children? Were they using them as hostages, or was it something more sinister? Finally, President Connolly held up her hand, silencing the room. "We can argue strategy all day, but we need intelligence. Without knowing where the children are or why they were taken, we can't act effectively." She turned toward Ethan. "Commander Vale, you've faced unknown threats before. What do you propose?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze sharp and steady. "We need to force their hand," he said. "We hit one of their outposts, grab whatever data we can, and send a message that humanity isn't going to sit quietly. They won't negotiate with us, so we need to make them respond." Several leaders shifted uneasily. "You're proposing a preemptive strike?" one of them asked. "That could escalate things beyond recovery." Ethan's expression hardened. "It's already beyond recovery. The moment they took our children, they declared war. We have to show them that we're not afraid to fight back." Admiral Kane nodded approvingly. "I agree with Commander Vale. A tactical strike won't just give us intel. It'll also show the Kravik that humanity won't be prey." Despite the murmurs of disagreement from others at the table, the decision was made. Operation Dawn was greenlit, a covert mission to hit a Kravik outpost believed to be lightly guarded. The goal was simple: retrieve any data on the missing children and disrupt the Kravik's operations enough to provoke a reaction. The following day, Ethan stood in the hangar of the UES Resolute, Earth's flagship, as soldiers prepared for the mission. Drones buzzed overhead, carrying equipment and supplies. Engineers scrambled to calibrate the weapon systems on the dropships. Ethan's hand rested on the hilt of his plasma pistol, a familiar weight that reminded him of the countless missions he'd survived. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about bringing Ivy and every other stolen child back home. Admiral Kane approached, his gaze steady. "You ready for this, Commander?" Ethan nodded. "I've been ready since the moment they took her." The dropships lifted off in formation, carrying Ethan and a team of elite soldiers toward the Kravik outpost, hidden deep in uncharted space. As they approached the target, tension filled the cabin. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the cold, calculated rage that simmered beneath the surface. The Kravik had made a mistake, a catastrophic one, and he was going to make sure they paid for it. The dropships broke through the atmosphere of a barren planet, skimming low over jagged mountains and ash-covered plains. In the distance, the alien outpost came into view, an ominous structure that seemed to pulse with an eerie organic light. Kravik patrols moved with insect-like precision, their metallic bodies gleaming under the pale light of distant stars. Ethan's voice crackled over the comms. "Remember the mission. Get in, grab the intel, and get out. No unnecessary risks." The soldiers nodded, their faces grim and determined. These were some of Earth's best, veterans of conflicts both on and off-world. But none of them had ever faced anything like the Kravik. As the dropships hovered above the ground, the troops rappelled down, weapons drawn, moving swiftly and silently toward the outpost. Ethan led the charge, his senses heightened as they breached the perimeter. The alien architecture was unlike anything he'd seen, organic walls that seemed to shift and pulse, machinery that hummed with an unsettling frequency. The air was thick with tension, as if the very structure of the outpost was alive and aware of their presence. They moved deeper into the facility, neutralizing patrols with ruthless efficiency. Ethan's team reached the central command chamber, where a massive console glowed with alien symbols. One of the tech specialists plugged in a decryption device, working quickly to download whatever data they could find. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility, and the walls began to shift, closing in like the jaws of a trap. The Kravik had detected their presence. "Move!" Ethan barked. "We're out of time!" The team fought their way back toward the extraction point, plasma rifles blazing. Kravik soldiers swarmed them, their movements eerily coordinated. For every alien they took down, 2 more seemed to appear. But Ethan didn't falter. He couldn't afford to, not with so much at stake. Just as they reached the dropships, the tech specialist handed Ethan a data drive. "Got it," he panted. "Coordinates. They've taken the children to multiple locations across their empire." Ethan's heart raced. They finally had a lead. But before he could process the information, a Kravik drone launched a plasma bolt toward them. Ethan shoved the specialist out of the way, taking the hit square in his side. Pain seared through his body, but he gritted his teeth and hauled himself onto the dropship. The door slammed shut, and the dropships lifted off, narrowly escaping the collapsing outpost. As they ascended into the sky, Ethan clutched the data drive tightly in his hand, ignoring the pain in his side. They had what they came for. The children were still out there. And now they knew where to find them. Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the comms. "Mission accomplished, Commander." Ethan leaned back, his breathing heavy, but steady. "Not yet," he said grimly. "But we're just getting started." The war for humanity's future was only beginning. The data recovered from the Kravik outpost provided the first glimmer of hope since the abduction. Spread across the Kravik Empire, the missing children were being held in several remote installations. Some of the locations were research facilities, others military compounds, but all of them were deep within enemy territory. It was clear, rescuing them wouldn't be simple. And worse, time was running out. Ethan Vale stood in the strategy room aboard the UES Resolute with Admiral Kane, poring over star charts and tactical readouts. The Kravik had fortified their outer defenses, but the intelligence gave them an advantage. A brief window of vulnerability at a supply hub located on the planet Gathra. If they could strike fast, they might capture critical transport routes and disrupt the flow of reinforcements. More importantly, it could confirm which of the locations held the children. "We need this win," Kane said, his voice low and urgent. "If we hit them hard here, they'll know we're not backing down." Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's risky. They'll expect retaliation sooner or later, but they won't think we'll come this fast. That's our edge." Kane grinned grimly. "That's why you're leading the charge, Commander. The mission's yours." It was decided. Operation Dawn, the first major offensive against the Kravik, would begin in hours. Ethan returned to the barracks to brief the strike team, a mix of elite soldiers, engineers and pilots. The men and women who gathered around him had hardened expressions, each carrying the weight of personal losses. Many had children of their own, taken in the abductions. Ethan stood at the front, meeting their eyes one by one. "We've all lost something to the Kravik. Some of us lost everything. This mission isn't just about payback. It's about showing them what happens when you mess with humanity." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the group. "This is only the beginning. We're going to fight for every child, every inch of ground, until the Kravik learn one thing. When you take from us, we take everything." The soldiers gave a grim, determined nod, their resolve solidifying like steel. As the final preparations were made, Ethan felt the familiar calm before a storm. War was an old companion, and though he had hoped to leave it behind, it felt like slipping into a well-worn coat. Hours later, the fleet assembled in orbit, poised for the attack. The UES Resolute led the charge, flanked by Earth's newest combat vessels, small but agile frigates equipped with experimental stealth tech. The plan was simple: hit the Kravik supply hub before they could muster a defense, gather intelligence, and cripple their logistics. But nothing ever went according to plan in war. The fleet jumped into the Gathra system, the starlight warping as they emerged from faster-than-light travel. The Kravik outpost loomed ahead, a sprawling facility built into the rocky surface of a barren moon. Alarms lit up on the fleet's displays. The element of surprise was already slipping away. The Kravik weren't caught entirely off guard. "Stealth approach compromised!" the tactical officer shouted over the comms. They're locking onto us! Enemy fighters incoming!" Ethan slammed his fist on the console. "All ships, engage! No turning back now! We hit them hard and fast!" The space around the fleet exploded into chaos as Kravik ships swarmed toward them. The alien vessels were sleek and organic in design, moving with unsettling grace. Plasma bolts cut through the void, slamming into Earth's ships as human pilots fought to outmaneuver the incoming assault. Ethan's dropship shuddered violently as they descended toward the surface, weaving through enemy fire. "Hold it together!" he barked at the pilot. "We've got a job to do." They broke through the atmosphere, hurtling toward the supply hub at breakneck speed. As the dropship touched down, Ethan and his team stormed out, weapons drawn. Plasma rifles hummed with lethal energy as they spread out across the rocky terrain, advancing toward the Kravik defenses. The battle on the ground was brutal. Kravik soldiers swarmed from the outpost like a hive of enraged insects, their segmented limbs moving with eerie precision. Ethan fought alongside his team, every shot fired with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The smell of scorched metal and alien ichor filled the air as soldiers fell on both sides. Through the chaos, Ethan pressed forward, leading his team deeper into the heart of the supply hub. Explosions erupted around them, shaking the ground and sending debris flying. They fought through narrow corridors and wide-open cargo bays, securing every inch of ground with grit and fury. "We're closing in on the command center," Ethan called over the comms, kicking down a heavy door. Inside, alien consoles glowed with strange symbols. "Get that data downloaded now!" The tech specialist rushed forward, plugging in a decryption device. "It's encrypted. Give me a minute." Ethan's heart pounded as the sound of alien reinforcements echoed down the corridor. They didn't have a minute. The door burst open, and Kravik soldiers flooded in, their weapons blazing. Ethan dove for cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Plasma bolts zipped through the air as his team fought desperately to hold the line. "Hurry it up!" Ethan shouted, gritting his teeth as the battle raged around him. "I'm almost there!" the specialist cried, fingers flying over the alien console. Just as the Kravik began to overwhelm them, the decryption device beeped. "Got it!" the tech specialist exclaimed, pulling the data drive from the console. "Fall back!" Ethan barked. "We've got what we came for! Let's move!" The team fought their way back toward the extraction point, dodging enemy fire and narrowly avoiding plasma detonations. Just as they reached the dropship, Ethan saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive Kravik soldier, larger and more heavily armored than the rest, blocking their escape. The alien's eyes locked onto Ethan with unsettling intelligence, as if recognizing him as a threat. It raised a plasma cannon, but Ethan was faster. He fired a burst from his rifle, the shots connecting with deadly precision. The alien staggered but didn't fall. "Go! Get on the ship!" Ethan shouted to his team as he charged forward, firing until his weapon overheated. He tackled the alien, grappling with its massive frame in a desperate struggle. With a final brutal effort, Ethan jammed a plasma grenade under the alien's armor and rolled away just as it detonated. The explosion rocked the landing zone, sending both Ethan and the alien flying. Gasping for breath, Ethan staggered to his feet and hauled himself onto the dropship as it lifted off, leaving the burning outpost behind. "Status?" Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the comms as the dropship ascended into the sky. "We've got the data," Ethan panted, clutching his side where an alien blade had grazed him. "It's a start." The Kravik outpost erupted in flames below, a beacon of defiance against the darkness. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was the first step. And Ethan Vale knew one thing for certain. This war was far from over. The return to the UES Resolute was met with grim silence. They had struck the Kravik supply hub, retrieved valuable data, and sent a message that humanity would not cower. But as the adrenaline wore off, The soldiers began to realize how far they still had to go. The children were out there, scattered across Kravik facilities, spread across dozens of alien systems, and the cost of the rescue mission was climbing. Already, several of Earth's best pilots and soldiers had paid with their lives, and the war was only just beginning. Ethan Vale sat in the debriefing room, bruised and exhausted, staring at the decrypted data they had recovered. The news wasn't good. The Kravik were not keeping the children in one place, but rather dispersing them among research stations and bioengineering labs. Time was working against them. Every hour, the children were being subjected to experiments, some genetic, some neurological, and not all of them would survive. The question that gnawed at Ethan was why? Why children? Why take so many? And what did the Kravik want to achieve? Admiral Kane leaned over the strategy table, scrolling through the data. "They're using the children's biology for something," he muttered, his voice low with frustration. "But we still don't know what." President Connolly's image flickered on the holographic screen, her expression severe. "We need answers, Admiral, and we need them fast. The longer this drags on, the greater the public pressure to negotiate. People want their children back, and they're losing patience." Kane shot Ethan a look. "We can't negotiate with monsters." "We might not have a choice," Connolly replied sharply. "This war is bleeding us dry. We've lost ships, soldiers, and morale is plummeting. If we don't get results soon, there will be factions pushing for surrender." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening with rage. "Surrender? After what they've done? We'll never get those kids back if we give in. The only thing the Kravik understand is force." Kane nodded in agreement. "Commander Vale's right. We have to hit them where it hurts, and soon. But we need more than brute force. We need leverage." As if on cue, an intelligence officer entered the room, holding a datapad with trembling hands. "We might have just found that leverage," the officer said. "We intercepted communications from a Kravik defector, a high-ranking bioengineer. They claim to know the exact locations of the children and are willing to help if we bring them safely to Earth." The room fell silent. A Kravik defector. It was the kind of opportunity that could turn the tide, but it was also a monumental risk. Trusting an alien from the very species responsible for kidnapping their children? The idea was unthinkable to some. Kane leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. It could be a trap. The Kravik aren't exactly known for their charity. Ethan crossed his arms, eyes cold and calculating. "We don't have the luxury of playing it safe. If this defector can give us the locations of the children, we have to take the chance." Connolly's holographic image flickered again. "I agree, but the defector has one condition. They want to be escorted by a small team personally, without any heavy military presence. They're afraid their own people will intercept them if we draw too much attention." Kane swore under his breath. "Of course they do. That makes this even more dangerous." Ethan exhaled sharply, knowing what was coming. He had led countless high-risk missions in the past, and this one would be no different. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. "I'll bring the defector back." Kane nodded slowly, though his expression was grim. "You'll take a stealth team, no backup. If this goes south, you'll be on your own." Ethan didn't flinch. He had made peace with the risks the moment the Kravik had taken Ivy. This mission wasn't just another assignment, it was personal. Hours later, Ethan stood on the loading ramp of a sleek black transport ship, the rest of his stealth team preparing for departure. They were all experienced operatives, hand-picked for their ability to move unseen and adapt on the fly. Each of them knew the stakes, and none of them hesitated. As the ship took off, Ethan sat quietly, mentally reviewing every possible scenario. His mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, ambushes, and double crosses. But beneath it all, he clung to a flicker of hope. If this defector was telling the truth, They might finally have a chance to bring the children home. The journey to the rendezvous point was tense and silent, the blackness of space pressing against the hull like a weight. They arrived at the outskirts of an abandoned asteroid field, an ideal place for clandestine meetings. No signals, no patrols, just silence. "Stay sharp," Ethan ordered his team as the ship drifted closer to the designated coordinates. "If this is a trap, we're not giving them the first shot." Moments later, a small Kravik shuttle uncloaked before them, hovering ominously. It bore none of the markings of a military vessel, and its systems were powered down. Still, Ethan didn't let his guard drop. "Open a channel," he ordered. A garbled voice crackled through the comms, distorted but intelligible. "This is Drakthal. I seek sanctuary. Please, do not fire." Ethan exchanged a glance with his pilot. "Bring them aboard, carefully." The airlock hissed as the Kravik defector stepped into the human vessel, their appearance causing a ripple of unease among the crew. Drakthal's insectoid frame was gaunt, their movements cautious. They carried no weapons, only a small data module clutched in one of their many hands. Ethan approached, his gaze cold. "You have information we need. If this is a trick—" "It is no trick," Drakthal interrupted, their voice rasping with exhaustion. "Your children, they are being used to stabilize our species. Without their genetic material, we will collapse, but I can help you save them." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You're experimenting on our children." Drakthal lowered their head in what seemed like shame. "It was not my choice. Our leaders believe that humanity's genetic diversity is the key to reversing our decline. They see it as a necessity. But I cannot be part of this anymore." Ethan fought the urge to lash out. His hands twitched toward his weapon, but he knew killing Drakthal wouldn't help Ivy or the others. "You better hope your information is good," he growled, "because if it's not, there's nowhere in this galaxy you can hide." Drakthal nodded solemnly and extended the data module. "This contains the coordinates of the research facilities where the children are being held. Some may already be lost, but not all. If you move quickly, you can still save them." Ethan took the module, his heart pounding. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, but it came with a grim realization. Time was slipping away faster than they'd feared. As the transport ship lifted off, Ethan stared out the viewport, his mind racing. The Kravik had taken everything from them. Now it was time to take everything back. The rescue mission was no longer just a desperate hope. It was a ticking clock. And failure wasn't an option. The journey back to the fleet was supposed to be uneventful, but nothing about war ever went smoothly. As Ethan Vale's transport ship streaked through the void toward the UES Resolute, tension hung thick in the air. The Kravik defector Drakthal sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, his insectoid limbs tucked tightly against his body, giving no indication of malice, just weariness. But Ethan's instinct screamed at him that something was off. Halfway through their return, alarms blared inside the transport. The pilot cursed, yanking hard on the controls as the ship lurched violently. "We've got incoming. Human vessels. They're locking weapons." "Human vessels?" Ethan barked, confusion mixing with fury. "What the hell is going on?" Before the crew could react, several sleek, earth-built fighters decloaked around them, their weapons armed and ready. A garbled transmission came through, but Ethan already knew what this was, a betrayal from within. Someone inside the fleet had sold them out. Whether for power, control, or greed, it didn't matter. The rescue mission was being sabotaged by their own people. The voice on the comms was cold and clipped. "Commander Vale, stand down. Hand over the Kravik defector and the data you've acquired. This is a classified operation now." Ethan gritted his teeth as his worst suspicions were confirmed. "You're out of your mind," he growled. "You want to cut deals with the enemy while they have our children?" "This isn't about the children." the voice replied. "This is about survival. The technology the Kravik possess is invaluable. We can use it to ensure humanity's dominance in the galaxy." Ethan slammed his fist into the wall, fury threatening to overwhelm him. The betrayal ran deep, deeper than he'd feared. Some factions within Earth's leadership weren't interested in rescuing the children. They wanted to seize Kravik technology and leverage it for power, no matter the cost. "You're throwing away lives for scraps of tech," Ethan snarled. "That's not survival. That's cowardice." The voice on the comm didn't waver. "This isn't your decision, Commander. Stand down or we will open fire." Ethan glanced toward Drakthal, who remained eerily calm despite the unfolding chaos. "What did I tell you?" Ethan muttered to himself. "We should have expected this." There was no time to argue. Ethan gave the order. "Evasive maneuvers. Get us the hell out of here." The pilot didn't need to be told twice. Engines roared as the transport banked hard, narrowly avoiding a barrage of missiles. The sleek fighters pursued, their weapons lighting up the void, determined to prevent Ethan's team from escaping with the defector and the data. "Hang on!" the pilot shouted, yanking the transport into a tight roll through an asteroid field. The ship shuddered under the stress, debris scraping against the hull as they weaved through the maze of rock and ice. Ethan clutched his seat, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had expected danger on this mission, but not from his own people. He swore under his breath. This wasn't just about survival now. It was about trust, betrayal, and doing what was right, even when the world around him crumbled. The Kravik defector finally spoke, his voice a low rasp. "Your people are divided. This weakness will destroy you." Ethan shot him a glare. "We're not weak. We're just figuring out who we can trust." A missile streaked past the transport, exploding dangerously close. Ethan made a snap decision. "We need to take them out," he said, turning to the gunners aboard the ship. "No more running." The transport's weapons roared to life, plasma turrets firing in rapid bursts. The sleek enemy fighters danced through the asteroid field, trying to avoid the incoming fire. But Ethan's team was relentless. One by one, the hostile ships were disabled or destroyed, their wreckage drifting into the void. With the immediate threat neutralized, the transport surged forward, racing toward the UES Resolute. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The betrayal had cut deep, but they still had a mission to complete. The children were out there, waiting for someone to save them, and Ethan wasn't about to let them down. Hours later, Ethan stood in the command chamber aboard the Resolute, the data module clutched in his hand. Admiral Kane paced the room, his expression grim. "The rogue faction wasn't working alone," Kane muttered. "There are more of them, embedded across the fleet. They've been plotting this for months." Ethan slammed the data module onto the table. "We don't have time for this. The children are being experimented on, and we're sitting here fighting ourselves." Kane nodded, frustration etched across his face. "Agreed. We need to move now, before the Kravik realize what we're planning. But with traitors among us, we'll need to be careful. We can't trust everyone." Ethan leaned over the table, eyes burning with determination. "Then we go with a small strike team. In and out. We hit them before they see us coming." Kane studied Ethan for a moment, then gave a sharp nod. "We'll do it your way. But this has to be quick. If we're discovered, it's over." Ethan's team assembled within the hour, an elite group of soldiers hand-picked for their loyalty and skill. Every one of them had a personal stake in the mission. They weren't just fighting for orders. They were fighting for their families, their children, and the future of humanity. Drakthal stood silently at the edge of the room, observing the preparations. Ethan approached him, his expression unreadable. "You better be right about those coordinates," Ethan said quietly, "because if this is a trap—" "It is not a trap," Drakthal interrupted. I have no love for my people. They betrayed me, just as some of your own have betrayed you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, well, betrayal doesn't get easier, no matter who it comes from." The alien tilted his head, studying Ethan with an almost curious expression. "You are different from the others. Your anger burns, but it does not consume. That is why you will succeed." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have time for philosophy. He had a mission to complete. The strike team's transport ship slipped through the Kravik's outer defenses, cloaked by stealth technology. They had one chance to infiltrate the enemy facility undetected. If they were caught, it would mean not only the failure of the mission, but the execution of every child still alive. Ethan's hands tightened around his rifle as the transport touched down on the barren surface of an alien world. The air was thick with tension as the team disembarked, moving swiftly and silently toward the sprawling facility ahead. Inside, the Kravik base was a labyrinth of glowing corridors and pulsating walls. The alien architecture was as strange and unsettling as ever, but Ethan's team moved with precision, planting charges and disabling security systems as they advanced. They reached the control center without incident, and the tech specialist plugged into the alien console, working quickly to download the necessary data. But just as they completed the transfer, the alarms blared to life. "They know we're here!" Ethan barked. "Move! We need to get out, now!" The team fought their way back through the twisting corridors, plasma bolts lighting up the darkness as Kravik soldiers swarmed them. Ethan moved like a man possessed, every shot fired with purpose and fury. As they reached the extraction point, Drakthal turned to Ethan. "Your people fight with desperation. That is your strength." Ethan gave a grim smile. "Damn right it is." The transport roared to life, lifting off just as the facility exploded behind them in a blinding flash. Ethan collapsed into his seat, breathing hard, but knowing the mission wasn't over. They had the data. They knew where the children were. But the real battle was just beginning, and Ethan Vale would stop at nothing to bring them home. The cold vacuum of space seemed heavier as the UES Resolute hurtled toward the coordinates provided by Drakthal. They had entered the outer regions of Kravik-controlled territory, a region so isolated and fortified that no human ship had ventured this far. Ethan Vale stood in the ship's command center, reviewing the final stages of their plan. The mission was simple, but brutal. Infiltrate the Kravik research facility, locate the children, and extract as many as possible. The twist? There was no margin for error. If they were detected, the Kravik would likely execute the children on the spot. Ethan's strike team was suited up, weapons calibrated, nerves tightly wound. The hours before a mission were always the hardest, every second stretching thin with anticipation, every possibility playing out in the mind like a grim reel of what could go wrong. Ethan knew the odds weren't on their side. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but they had one advantage: stealth. The Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the system. Before them loomed an enormous Kravik facility, a monstrous structure built into the crust of a frozen moon. Organic spires twisted skyward from its surface, pulsing with a sickly green light. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach at the sight. Somewhere inside that labyrinth of metal and alien flesh were the children. Ivy was in there. The clock was ticking. "Prepare for drop," Ethan ordered, his voice calm but steely. His team snapped into action, strapping into their transport pods, small, nearly invisible capsules designed for stealth infiltration. They would be fired toward the moon's surface in a tight formation, slipping through the Kravik's defenses under the cover of darkness. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Pods are locked and loaded. We'll hit the surface in 30 seconds. Ethan took a deep breath, focusing his mind. The fear, the anger, the exhaustion, he pushed it all aside. There would be time for emotion later. Now there was only the mission. "Launch," he said. The transport pods shot out from the Resolute like bullets, streaking silently toward the moon's surface. Inside his cramped capsule, Ethan felt the familiar weightlessness of freefall. Through the small viewport, he could see the alien structure growing closer, its grotesque architecture glowing against the icy landscape. His heart pounded in rhythm with the countdown in his head. The pods hit the surface with a soft thud, perfectly synchronized. Ethan's harness released, and the pod door hissed open. He rolled out onto the frozen ground, rifle at the ready. Around him, his team emerged from their capsules, weapons drawn, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Move," Ethan whispered into his comm. "We stick to the plan." The team advanced toward the facility, their boots crunching softly on the ice. They moved in complete silence, shadows slipping through the night. Ahead of them, the Kravik sentries were unaware of the approaching danger. The alien guards patrolled with mechanical precision, their glowing eyes scanning the landscape. But they didn't see the humans until it was too late. Ethan's team neutralized them with swift, silent precision. They reached the entrance of the facility, a towering gate that pulsed with an eerie green light. Ethan motioned to the tech specialist, who knelt beside the control panel, hacking into the alien system. 10 seconds, the specialist whispered, fingers dancing over the alien interface. Ethan counted silently, his senses heightened. Every second stretched into eternity. He could almost feel Ivy's presence inside the facility, close but just out of reach. The gate hissed open, and the team slipped inside. The interior of the facility was worse than Ethan had imagined. The walls seemed alive, pulsating with strange organic matter that shimmered under the dim lights. Alien machinery hummed ominously, and the air was thick with an acrid metallic scent. Ethan felt a wave of revulsion, but he pressed on. There was no turning back now. They moved through the twisting corridors like ghosts, avoiding Kravik patrols and disabling security systems as they advanced deeper into the facility. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached the central chamber where the children were being held. "This is it," he whispered into his comm. "We find them, we get them out." The team reached the entrance to the chamber, a massive door sealed with alien runes. The tech specialist went to work again, his hands steady despite the pressure. The door slid open with a low groan, revealing a sight that made Ethan's blood run cold. Rows upon rows of containment pods lined the chamber, each one holding a child in stasis. Their small bodies floated peacefully inside the glowing capsules, unaware of the horrors unfolding around them. Ethan scanned the rows frantically, searching for a familiar face. "Ivy," he whispered under his breath, his heart pounding. And then he saw her. Near the back of the chamber, Ivy's small form floated inside a pod, her face serene, as if she were merely sleeping. A wave of emotion crashed over Ethan, relief, rage, and fierce determination all at once. He moved toward her, his hands trembling as he deactivated the pod's stasis field. The glass slid open with a soft hiss, and Ivy's eyes fluttered open, groggy but alive. "Uncle Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan choked back a sob, pulling her into his arms. "I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you." But the reunion was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the facility as the Kravik realized they had been breached. The walls pulsed with red light, and the sound of alien soldiers approaching echoed through the corridors. "We're out of time," Ethan barked into his comm. "Grab the children and move." His team sprang into action, releasing as many children from the pods as they could. But there were too many, and the Kravik were closing in fast. Ethan's heart ached with the knowledge that they wouldn't be able to save them all. "Fall back!" Ethan shouted, cradling Ivy in his arms. "We have to go, now!" The team fought their way back through the facility, plasma bolts flying in every direction. The Kravik swarmed them, their alien forms moving with terrifying speed. Ethan fired relentlessly, his only focus on keeping Ivy safe. They reached the extraction point just as the transport ship landed, its engines roaring. Ethan and his team piled inside, the children huddled close together, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Go, go, go!" Ethan shouted to the pilot. The ship lifted off, engines roaring as it blasted away from the facility. Plasma fires streaked past them, but the transport shields held. Ethan clutched Ivy tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. The Kravik facility exploded in a blinding flash behind them, the force of the blast shaking the ship. Ethan watched the fireball fade into the distance, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This wasn't the end. There were still more children out there, and the Kravik wouldn't stop hunting them. But for now, they had won a small but crucial victory. As the transport hurtled toward the UES Resolute, Ethan pressed a kiss to Ivy's forehead, his heart swelling with fierce determination. The Kravik had taken everything from them. Now it was humanity's turn to take everything back. The children they rescued huddled together in the medical bay of the UES Resolute, their small bodies weak from stasis, but alive. Ethan Vale sat beside his niece Ivy, who leaned sleepily against him, her tiny hands clutching his. Exhaustion pulled at him, but his mind was already racing toward the next step. They had saved some, but many children were still out there. And the Kravik? They would retaliate. And soon. Admiral Kane's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Commander Vale, report to the war room immediately." Ethan gently shifted Ivy to a medic and kissed her forehead. "I'll be back, kiddo. I promise." She nodded sleepily, her trust in him unwavering, even after everything she had endured. Ethan's heart clenched, but he forced himself to stand. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. In the war room the mood was tense. A holographic display of Kravik space hovered above the table, glowing ominously. Admiral Kane, along with a handful of Earth's highest-ranking officers and alien allies, stood around the map, grim-faced. "The good news," Kane said as Ethan entered, "is that our infiltration was successful. We have the locations of the remaining children, but the Kravik are mobilizing. They know we're coming." Ethan crossed his arms. "What's their next move?" A tactical officer tapped a section of the star map, highlighting multiple Kravik fleets converging. "They're pulling all their forces to their homeworld. They're betting everything on a final stand." Kane leaned forward, his voice grave. "This is it, Commander. If we don't hit them now, they'll entrench. And if they do, we'll never reach the rest of the children." The room fell silent as the weight of the moment settled on everyone present. This wasn't just another battle. This was humanity's chance to finish the war, to destroy the Kravik and end their reign of terror once and for all. Ethan's gaze swept across the gathered officers. "Then we hit them with everything we've got," he said, his voice hard with determination. "We take their homeworld. We finish this." Kane nodded. "It won't be easy. Their defenses are strong, and we're still outnumbered." One of the alien representatives, a wiry, silver-skinned diplomat named Nira from the Vale Collective, stepped forward. "But they've never faced an enemy like us. Humanity's strength lies in your unpredictability, your willingness to fight when all seems lost." Another alien, a massive warrior from the Kroth species, grinned. "And we owe the Kravik some payback of our own." A plan began to take shape. A desperate, audacious strike. The fleet would gather every available ship and launch a direct assault on the Kravik homeworld. Ethan would lead a ground team to infiltrate their central command center and disable their planetary defenses. If successful, the Kravik fleet would be vulnerable, and humanity's forces could deliver the final blow. The preparations were swift and brutal. Ships were refueled, weapons calibrated, and troops briefed. Ethan stood before his strike team one last time, their faces solemn but resolute. Each of them knew what was at stake. "This is it," Ethan told them. "This is what we've fought for. The Kravik thought they could break us. They thought they could take from us without consequence. Today, we show them just how wrong they were." The team responded with grim nods, their eyes filled with determination. There was no fear, only purpose. Hours later, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled jumped into Kravik space. The stars warped and twisted as the ships emerged, engines roaring, weapons charged. Before them, the Kravik homeworld loomed, a dark, massive sphere encircled by glowing rings and orbiting defense stations. Swarms of alien ships moved to intercept, the space between them filling with fire. The battle began with a thunderous explosion. Human ships dove into the fray, plasma bolts and missiles streaking through the void. Fighters weaved between capital ships, dogfighting with Kravik interceptors in a deadly dance. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield, scattering debris and shattered hulls. Ethan's dropship punched through the chaos, descending toward the planet's surface under heavy fire. His heart pounded as they broke through the atmosphere, alien spires and citadels looming below like twisted bones. The dropship rattled violently as it dodged enemy fire, but the pilot kept them steady. "Brace for landing!" the pilot shouted. The dropship touched down hard, its ramp lowering with a hiss. Ethan and his team stormed out, weapons ready. The Kravik were waiting. They fought their way through the alien streets, every step a struggle against overwhelming odds. Kravik soldiers swarmed from every direction, their mechanical limbs clattering against the ground, plasma weapons hissing as they fired. But Ethan's team fought with fury and precision, moving like a single unstoppable force. Every Kravik soldier that fell was a step closer to victory. Ethan led the charge, his rifle spitting plasma bolts as they pushed deeper into the alien city. The command center loomed ahead, a massive structure pulsing with green light. They were close. As they breached the command center's outer defenses, Ethan felt a surge of hope. This was it. They were going to disable the planetary defenses and end this war. But the Kravik weren't done yet. Inside the command center, the team encountered the Kravik High Commander, a massive armored figure with glowing eyes and a voice that echoed with malice. "You think you've won?" the alien hissed. "You've only hastened your extinction." The commander raised a plasma blade, and the room erupted into chaos. Ethan charged forward, engaging the alien in a brutal melee. Plasma clashed against steel as they fought, each strike fueled by rage and desperation. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, but he fought with everything he had. For Ivy, for the children, for humanity. With a final desperate strike, Ethan plunged his blade into the alien's chest, the Kravik commander collapsing with a guttural hiss. Ethan stood over the fallen enemy, his chest heaving, knowing that this was only the beginning of the end. He turned to his team, blood pounding in his ears. "Get those defenses offline! Now!" The tech specialist worked quickly, disabling the planetary shields. A moment later, the alien city's defenses flickered and went dark. Back in orbit, the fleet received the signal. Admiral Kane's voice roared over the comms. "Planetary defenses are down. All ships, attack!" The human fleet surged forward, tearing through the Kravik forces with relentless fury. Alien ships exploded in brilliant bursts, their wreckage scattering across the void. The Kravik homeworld burned under the assault, their once mighty empire crumbling before humanity's might. As the battle raged on, Ethan and his team extracted the remaining children from the facility. Every child they carried to safety was a victory. Every life saved a blow against the darkness. When the dust finally settled, the Kravik were broken, their fleet destroyed, their empire shattered. Humanity had won, but the victory came at a cost. Ships lay in ruins, soldiers mourned fallen comrades, and the rescued children carried scars that would never fully heal. Yet, through the pain, there was hope, a hope that humanity had not just survived, but emerged stronger. On the bridge of the Resolute, Ethan stood beside Admiral Kane, staring out at the wreckage of the Kravik fleet. Ivy stood beside him, her small hand in his. "It's over," Kane said quietly. Ethan nodded, though his gaze remained on the distant stars. "No," he whispered, "it's just the beginning." The Kravik had taken everything from them, but in the end, humanity had taken it all back, and more. Together, they had proven that when pushed to the brink, humanity wouldn't just survive. They would fight, they would endure, and they would ensure that no one would ever take from them again. The stars stretched out before them, full of endless possibilities, and Ethan Vale knew, with unshakable certainty, that humanity was ready for whatever came next.